Okay, good evening. This is going to be a response video to a segment of a debate that Greg Bahnsen had back in 1993 with lawyer Edward Tabash. The video I'm going to show is just 10 minutes long. It's Bahnsen's second opening statement. Each side had two opening statements. They had their initial one, and they had rebuttals and questions, and then they had a second one, another round, and this is the second round of opening statements that Greg Bahnsen made. It seemed to summarize his position well. So it's just 10 minutes long. I'm going to pause at each point that he makes, and I'm going to comment on them. The first one, I'm going to actually make a opening statement that I would give in response to Greg Bahnsen's opening statement. So it's kind of like I'm debating Greg Bahnsen here, if he were still alive. And then the other ones will just be short comments on the other points. But the first one will be like a 15-minute opening statement after Bahnsen makes his first point about induction. And then after that, I'll just pause it and give brief statements. And hopefully at the end, if I have any audience, I can read comments or take any questions that it's in the live chat. So that'd be great. So if my audio is bad or my video is bad or you can't hear the video, if the people are watching, if you can let me know in the side chat that, hey, can't hear or muted or whatever, I appreciate it. I'm on my own here tonight. I don't have anyone producing this show. It's just me and StreamYard. And I don't do this too often, so I don't have a lot of experience with it, but I'm working my way around. So I'm going to get started now. And we'll start with Greg Bahnsen. I'm not going to show any of the Edward Tabash part. The video that I took this from is in the description, and also the full 2 hours and 30-minute debate is also linked in the description as well if you want to see the full debate. I'm just taking the 10-minute segment of Greg Bahnsen's second opening statement, and I chopped it up, and where I plan to pause it to comment. So let's get started. So I will shrink me and increase the video here. So let's get started. Okay.
Dr. Bahnsen, may we now have your 10-minute opening statement?
Let me know if the video is loud enough.
I have a great appreciation for my opponent's feistiness, that he wants to continue to show, he has this sharp tongue and can issue these challenges to God and so forth. But I am still waiting for proof of the kind of, things that he just throws out there on his own authority, that there can't be a hell because of this reason, he can superimpose his values and so forth. I want you to notice something about what's going on in the debate here tonight. In the first place, Mr. Tabash has not yet understood the challenge that's been directed to him. He has very little time left to deal with it. I hope that he'll use it when it does come. In my opening remarks, I pointed out that the inductive principle needs a rational foundation, and that we use the inductive principle when we reason, when we engage in discourse, when we do anything to make our experience intelligible. Everything Mr. Tabash has been saying tonight, all of his reasoning, all of his argumentation, fallacious or not, all of it has assumed the inductive principle, that there's a uniformity in nature. That is not the design argument. So I hope that he gets to the debate tonight and catches up with what's going on, because no one is arguing the teleological argument tonight. Your opponent is arguing that those who argue against the teleological argument and those who argue in favor of it, those who argue against God and those who argue for God, everyone who argues assumes the uniformity of nature in the inductive principle, And we haven't been given a rational foundation for that. In fact, the inductive principle is contrary to the atheist view of the universe. So atheists continue to reason, continue to draw on past experience and to draw conclusions from past connections and that sort of thing, and yet they have no basis for believing that they have the right to do that. I'm just waiting for an explanation. It hasn't been given. When you appeal to sensory experience, you beg the question. By the way, better atheist philosophers than Mr. Tavish have already pointed that out. Hume and Bertrand Russell both pointed out you can't appeal to experience to prove the uniformity of nature. Why? Because the appeal to experience already assumes the uniformity of nature.
Okay, so I'm going to pause it here. So Bahnsen makes the claim that the inductive principle is contrary to the atheist view of the universe. So I'm actually going to read a prepared speech to respond to this. So I'm going to respond to the claim that the inductive principle is contrary to the atheist view, and also I'm going to basically give an opening statement responding to Greg Bahnsen's views and his presuppositional approach as well. So this will be around 10 minutes for me to read this. So, all right. So he makes the claim that the inductive principle is contrary to the atheist view of the universe. How is induction contrary to the atheist view of the universe? Presuppositionalists continually bring up the problem of induction, which Greg Bahnsen brings up a number of times in this debate, where they claim that they can know that things will be the same tomorrow as they were in the past because their God revealed it to them, where atheists can't know this based on our worldview, since there is no method available to us to determine it. If we appeal to our past experience, then we would only be begging the question. So the presuppositionalists will claim that they have an epistemic grounding for the uniformity of nature, where the atheist doesn't within our non-God worldview. They will appeal to their scripture, where in Genesis 8:22 it states, "While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease," where the atheist has no divine revelation nor other rational means to know that the future will resemble the past. But the Bible also teaches that anything is possible with our God, and that Jesus will return any time like a thief in the night, where the world will radically change. The powerless will become powerful, the poor will become rich, etc. Basically, the world will be turned upside down when the kingdom of God comes. See Luke 6. Of course, the New Testament writers believe that that would occur in their own lifetime. And since this event didn't happen, that shows Christianity to be false based on the Bible's own standard for prophecy. So it seems that the Christian Bible isn't a reliable source of knowledge of the future, and thus a poor justification for the reliability of induction, if those things could happen at any time. Since the Bible does not have a good track record in presenting actual prophetic predictions in the future, appealing to the Bible as a justification to guarantee the use of induction simply isn't well warranted. Also, how in the Christian worldview can we rely on the use of induction where their God suspends the natural laws during miracles? When a doctor finds a new potential cure for cancer, how can we know that it was based on natural laws of the universe and not some miracle from God? After all, we hear quite often Christians attributing their overcoming an illness like cancer to their God. If it is a divine intervention, then we cannot justify the cure will work on other patients in the future. Likewise, if a building remains standing in an earthquake while other structures around it collapse, we cannot study that building because it could have remained standing by a miracle from God rather than having a better structure that can naturally withstand earthquakes. How can we tell the difference? What specific metaphysical claims of Christianity does Greg Bahnsen think comports with science and the intelligibility of human experience? Is the claim that resurrected saints coming out of their graves and walking into Jerusalem to appear to the many found in Matthew 27 consistent with assumptions of science? How about a man walking on water in Mark 6, or turning water into wine in John 2? Does the intelligibility of human experience assume such a cartoon universe paradigm? On the contrary, it assumes a universe of brute natural regularities with rather than every molecule in the universe foreordained and predestined by the will of the mind of a Calvinist God. But the presupper merely posits what a naturalist materialist posits, that reality isn't about to change on him. Their rational justification for the uniformity of nature is simply that God made it that way. That's their answer. God did it. And where did they get this idea? Well, from the Bible, of course. But we can then ask, well, how do you know the Bible will not change when you read it tomorrow? Because God's word and God's himself will not change. And where did they learn that? Well, from the Bible, of course, which makes their account viciously circular. We are back to asking, how do they know that the Bible will not change when they read it tomorrow, thus arguing in a circle? Now, as for me, as a properly basic belief, I do take it on faith that tomorrow will be like the past, and I live my life accordingly. But I freely accept that things could change tomorrow as well. Even though I'm healthy right now, I could die tomorrow by a car accident or by any other means. If some law of physics changed tomorrow, then we would deal with it if we could, but we'd probably be all dead if that actually happened. But as a presupposition in my worldview, I take it for granted that the future will generally resemble the past. There is no inconsistency here, despite what Greg Bahnsen claims. There is no need to borrow from the Christian worldview as though they have exclusive ownership to these principles. Any worldview can assert them, just like presuppositionalists do in their own religion. But where is their transcendental argument? What is their argument that only their God is necessary for the preconditions of intelligibility or the reliability of induction? We hear the claim often, but we're not given any direct argument. Bahnsen's professor at the Westminster Theological Seminary, Cornelius Van Til, offered no strong tag argument either in all his writings. In fact, Van Til's student, John M. Frame, writes in his book Apologetics, A Justification for Christian Belief, that one weakness in Van Til's own writings is the lack of specific arguments. Van Til always said there was an absolutely certain argument for Christianity, but he rarely produced an example, except in the barest outline form. Bahnsen is more direct in his writings, but only offers arguments that are the typical God of the gaps, argument from incredulity, fallacy of composition, naive reduction type arguments we hear over and over again from apologists. It is hypocritical for presuppositionalists to complain when I am reasoning from the presuppositions of my own worldview that includes the uniformity of nature, when the presuppositionalist is doing this very same thing with their belief in their triune God. If it is okay to take some beliefs for granted, then why can't I have this belief of the reliability of induction as one that I can assume in my own worldview? It is in any case hardly clear that why my belief should be thought to be less worthy than the belief that their God exists. To question the presuppositions of my worldview would not be an internal critique. If they want me to justify the presuppositions of my worldview, then I demand the same for their worldview and ask them to justify the existence of their God without assuming their God exists. Presuppositionalists like Greg Bahnsen may then invoke their transcendental claim that their God is necessary for induction, knowledge, logic, morality, and intelligibility in general, but they actually have to defend the premise that their God is necessary for those things against all of the worldviews rather than just claiming it. I've yet to hear an argument from their side that all other possibilities are themselves impossible or reduced to absurdity. They will claim the impossibility of the contrary, but I have yet to see a clear argument from Bahnsen, Van Til, Gordon Clark, and all the later presuppositional apologists that have come after them. They are appealing to their ontology to justify their epistemology. I can do the same in my worldview. In the words from his The Myth of Neutrality lecture, Greg Bahnsen states, when it gets around to verifying that ultimate authority against the other person's ultimate authority, I will end up assuming my ultimate authority, so will the unbeliever. So if they're allowed to assume their ultimate authority, then they should give me the privilege of assuming my ultimate authority, which are my presuppositions, the properly basic beliefs that we all live by. The presuppositionalists may be critical of the fact that I do accept the belief of the uniformity of nature as a presupposition on faith, but I remind them that Dr. Bahnsen himself, in the first opening statement of this debate, stated that reasoning itself rests upon the presupposition of faith and collapses as arbitrary without it. The question is which worldview comports with the natural revelation, scientific discovery, and historical conclusions that we have come to agree with, and also bringing an accurate prediction that can lead to knowledge and flourishing of humanity. I do hold many presuppositions, but I do not have a presupposition about God's not existing, nor that all that exists resides in the natural realm. My belief that the Christian God does not exist is a conclusion I've reached based on my experience and reasoning from my properly basic beliefs I hold as presuppositions. Dr. Bahnsen and other presuppositionalists may claim that science, math, logic, historical inquiry rests upon the necessary and exclusive Christian presuppositions about reality, but I've never seen a successful tag argument from him nor any Christian apologist. I have adopted provisionally the worldview of philosophical naturalism because of the success of methodological naturalism. But my belief in naturalism is a hard-won conclusion that people have slowly come to in the very face of supernaturalism. We can trace the history of naturalism from the beginning of modern science. Materialism, naturalism, etc., are broad ontological views that are arrived at the very teeth of religious dogma because of unprecedented successes of the natural sciences, in which there is no need for supernatural assumptions, and because the utter failure of supernatural worldviews to produce anything. With it, we made tremendous advances in industry, medicine, agriculture, and many other fields. Supernaturalism has never led anywhere. I accept philosophical naturalism from methodological naturalism because of the demonstrated success of methodological naturalism, the massive amounts of progress and knowledge gained by it, the unreliable epistemology for knowing the supernatural, and the lack of evidence and counter evidence for supernatural claims. These reasons provide solid grounding for philosophical naturalism, while Christian supernaturalism remains at best a logical possibility and at worst a worldview reduced to absurdity. Theistic assumptions have just proved irrelevant. And in the case of Dr. Bahnsen's fundamentalist interpretations of the Bible that he formally affirmed to with his written signature on the Chicago Statement on Biblical Inerrancy, the literal interpretations of the supposed historical events described in the Bible have been shown to be false, such as the literal six-day creation, all of humanity coming from Adam and Eve, as well as the 8 humans on Noah's Ark, the Noah's flood story itself, the Exodus story, the Joshua conquest, the worldwide census story found in the Gospel of Luke, and more. So I ask, assuming the atheistic worldview, such as metaphysical naturalism, I'm sorry. So I asked, assuming in an atheistic worldview such as metaphysical naturalism, how is the uniformity of nature impossible? I don't see that as a case, even if I cannot offer a rational deductive justification for it. This is an epistemic problem, not an ontological problem or a metaphysical problem, which I think Greg Bahnsen's asserting here. He's saying it's just not a knowledge problem, an epistemic problem, but rather it's a metaphysical problem, that it's simply not possible in an atheistic worldview. That needs an argument. I haven't seen it. Given the Christian worldview of supernatural beings that can change reality through miracles, as well as deceiving supernatural agents such as demons, and even the Christian God itself that sends strong delusions and lying spirits to sinners, positing a mindless reality of stable regularities is actually epistemologically more trustworthy than positing a reality that can be changed by the will of a supermind and other supernatural agents. If the supernatural world is how reality actually is, then that's a reason to trust our foundational beliefs less, not more. The exact opposite conclusion is implied to the one presuppositionalist like Bahnsen wants to affirm. So again, the reliability of induction is one of the presuppositions of my worldview. If the nature of the universe is stable in such a way where regularities exist, then I can reliably use induction. I don't try to justify my properly basic beliefs because I don't wish to engage in circular reasoning. Rather, we must reason by presupposition, which Greg Bahnsen writes in his article, Presuppositional Procedure. If they resolve our epistemic problems by appealing to the ontology of the worldview, so can I. Also, I note the uniformity in nature is no guarantee that induction is always reliable. It is a necessary but not sufficient condition for induction. Just because nature is uniform doesn't mean that after seeing many white swans consistently, that the next swan you will see will be white. Just Google black swans and you'll see what I mean. So in my worldview, the uniformity of nature is simply grounded ontologically in the nature of the universe itself. By saying that nature is uniform because the Christian God made it that way, it amounts to the view that the uniformity of nature is a product of some prior cause. This assumes the continuity of any causal process, so the justification that nature is uniform proposed by presuppositionalists assume the uniformity of nature at the start. They claim that all these things they think need accounting for are solved by invoking the nature of their God, because that is the way their God is without an available recourse to explanation why. I say that the universe's laws are what they are without any available recourse to explanation why. They have not provided a superior account. There may be an epistemic problem here, but I see no metaphysical nor ontological problem with the uniformity of nature in a world without a God to make it so. So again, I ask, is the inductive principle contrary to the atheist view of the universe, like Bahnsen states in this debate? Is it metaphysically impossible for nature to be uniform if the God of the Reformed Christian biblical canon does not exist? I don't see any reason to think so, nor has Dr. Bahnsen presented any more than strawman attacks, fallacy of composition, and naive reductionism that if atheism is true, then that we are merely molecules in motion in a random chance world, and epistemic difficulties that philosophers have struggled over centuries are now overcome by invoking his God as a solution. Bahnsen constructs a straw man that a godless universe entails a universe that there is nothing but random chance, where there's no uniformity, no abstract logic, quantitative, spatial, or causal relations, no dispositional states that bring about sentience and consciousness. Presuppositional apologists need to provide a true transcendental argument here. What we just have is a epistemic issue and have to rely on our faith, but there's nothing in the atheistic worldview that is contrary to the uniformity of nature, nor the reliability of, nor the reliable use of induction. To say that the inductive principle and uniformity of nature does not comport with atheism is simply false. There is no contradiction. So that's my opening statement, and I addressed Bahnsen's claim that the inductive principle is contrary to the atheist view of the universe. I'm going to continue on, and my next responses will be much shorter than this opening statement that I just gave. So I know this one was kind of long, but my next responses will be short, or at least shorter.
Now, as you consider the background worldviews of atheism or Christian theism, I want you to observe that the life of the atheist is riddled with inconsistency and thus is exposed as being utterly irrational. Atheists will presuppose human dignity and attend the funeral of a friend or to honor a relative, even a child with Down syndrome, but then they will turn around and argue that man has no dignity, is no different than any other product of evolution, like a snail or a dog or a horse. I don't see how they bring these two things together. The atheist will insist that man is nothing more than a complex of biochemical factors controlled by the laws of physics, and yet he kisses his wife and his children when he goes home, as though there is something called love that each of us share in the family.
Right. So here's an example of Bahnsen saying, "Oh well, in the atheistic worldview, we're just molecules in motion. We're just bags of DNA and so forth." A lot of derogatory terms. Um, do atheists presuppose human dignity? Well, yes. Why? Because we want to be treated that way. Isn't that good enough? If we treat each other with dignity, it will lead to human flourishing. That's why we treat people with human dignity. We want to be treated that way. We're more than just molecules in motion. We're molecules in motions arranged a certain way in which we feel, we think, we're sentient, we're conscious, we have desires, we have needs, we have wants. We have concerns. We have concerns for our family, for our loved ones, and so forth. Those are reasons good enough to want human dignity. We don't need it. We don't need an extrinsic value placed on that. Okay, happiness and well-being is something intrinsic, as intrinsic value in and of itself. We don't need a God to impose it extrinsically on us. So again, there's no inconsistency here in the atheistic worldview about wanting to have dignity and take care of our families and loved ones and so forth. It's perfectly natural. I don't see any issue or inconsistency at all. Okay, moving on.
The atheist will argue that in sexual relations, anything goes. There are no moral absolutes. Don't impose your views on others. He'll even defend prostitution, but then indignantly condemn child molesters or morally repudiate necrophilia.
All right, here's the typical moral argument. Not only Bahnsen gives it, but it's a very common argument among all sorts of Christian apologists. You'll hear from Frank Turek, William Lane Craig, you name it. That you must have God to have morality, and we usually mean objective morality. I wonder what Bahnsen means by moral absolutes. What does absolute mean? That's absolutely the case, exceptionalist and so forth, or does he just mean objective morality? He never really defines that well. But of course, atheist philosophers, some are moral realists, some are moral subjectivists. I lean towards subjectivism. But does anything go? The atheists will argue that in sexual relations, anything goes. No. All sexual relations have consequences, and those negative consequences are bad, so we shouldn't do them. If we don't want to suffer those those consequences. So does anything goes? No, not if you know what's good for you. No, some actions lead to human flourishing, and some don't. My moral theory is based on the flourishing, the well-being of sentient human beings, and I do favor my own species. I favor my loved ones, my family, myself over friends and acquaintances. Our concern is close, and then as it expands, our concern grows less and less, and that's how we developed evolutionary. Our evolutionary past developed that because it leads to basically our reproductive success. But we're a social species. We have to live together. We can't survive. We're not spiders. We're not hermits. We have to live together as a social species, and from there we develop our moral laws, and it's based on human flourishing. So the idea that there's no morals, anything goes, and so forth, it's false. Why do we condemn things like child molesters or necrophilia and so forth? Well, because molesting children leads to suffering. We don't want that done to our children. We don't want our children to suffer. So we condemn that sort of thing. It's not it's not some mystery here. So this typical view that God is necessary for objective morality. I don't see how any person can offer objective morality. If you're basing your morality on God, God is a subject. So therefore, that form of divine command theory is subjective morality. It's not objective. You can't ground objective morality in a person because a person is a subject. So I don't see how Christians continually say, "Oh, you have to have God for objective morality." I'm sorry, that's subjective morality. That's not objective. So moving on.
You see, the atheist is just a bundle of contradictions. He can't bring his worldview into harmony with itself. He'll suggest that things which happen in the universe happen randomly. It just is that way, arbitrarily. Talk about primitive thinking. That's far more primitive than anything you can find, even in the time the Bible was written. It just happened. But then he'll turn around and he looks for regularities and law-like explanations of events. He looks for uniformity and predictability in the things that he studies in natural science.
A bundle of contradiction, huh? Well, I guess in Greg Bahnsen's straw man view of atheism, I guess there's contradiction. But he'll suggest that things which happen in the universe happen randomly. I don't think so. Don't they happen according to the laws of physics, according to the properties and nature of the universe? They really happen randomly? I don't think so. I find it interesting that apologists at one time will say, well, in atheism, everything's random. It's just all random. And then when it comes to things like free will and so forth, and and our reason and so forth, oh, everything's determined by the laws of physics. Well, you can't have it both ways. You can't have randomness and chaos and then have everything is determined, by antecedent causes by the laws of physics, which is a Greg Bahnsen. They'll just throw out all these different crazy views on atheism, and they basically contradict themselves when they make their arguments. But I don't see any contradiction in my worldview. Just Bahnsen's strawman view here. It just happens, but he'll turn around and he'll look for regularities. Yeah, because we observe regularities, right? And laws and explanations. He looks for the uniformity and predictability. Yes, study for natural sciences. Well, we already went over the problem of induction, but yeah, we see regularities and we assume uniformity. We don't claim everything's random. When we flip a coin and it comes up heads or tails, is that a random event? Is that arbitrary? No, it's based on how strong you flip the coin up, the spin of it, how it lands, and so forth. It's all determined by the laws of science. There's nothing random there. We call it random because it's hard to predict. It's hard to calculate all those factors, but it's not random. It's determined by antecedent causes. So again, Greg Bahnsen, I ask, well, is everything random or is everything determined? Which is it? You can't have it both ways.
You see, the atheist doesn't have a workable worldview.
Again, straw man. Again, it's based on his naive perceptions of atheism. Again, where's the argument? Typical in presuppositionalism is they'll assert, but never make a strong argument to support it. Just like the tag argument. They say, oh, God is necessary, the impossibility of the contrary. It's a transcendental argument. Well, offer. You need to show. You need to show it, demonstrate it. Just don't assert it.
He may go on and on autobiographically about how he doesn't like the God of the Bible and doesn't like the doctrine of hell and all that, but he doesn't have a workable worldview in terms of which to reason in the first place, to argue at all. And he exposes its weaknesses at every turn in his life. You see, you can claim that there is nothing spiritual, nothing immaterial, nothing abstract and universal, that only concrete particular things exist. You can claim that events are just random, that there's no personal plan or control or purpose in the universe. You can claim that reality amounts to nothing more but matter in motion. But you can't act or reason in that way.
Again, more straw man representation. Atheists claim that there's nothing immaterial, there's nothing abstract, there's no abstract concepts like numbers or math or causal relationships or logical relationships and so forth. I don't think that's the case. I mean, you could be an atheist and be a Platonist, right? You could be a Platonist. I'm not a Platonist. I lean towards nominalism myself, but that doesn't mean that that there aren't universal laws that apply everywhere. Logical laws exist within a paradigm, which is useful, but there's different logical systems. But but to claim that all atheists think only concrete particular things exist, well, you can get into a debate over Platonism versus nominalism versus moderate realism and so forth like that. Are numbers real? Fictionalism. There's all sorts of different views and so forth. But again, he's back to asserting that all events are random. Well, are they random? Are there antecedent causes? Are things determined or random? Again, I don't think it's random. I'm more of a determinist. So again, this is this more strawman view that Greg Bahnsen has. Again, you can claim that reality amounts to nothing more but matter in motion. But so again, we're back to just fallacy of composition. That's what I mentioned before. It's a fallacy of composition. A computer is just made up of silicone, metal, rubber, plastic, and so forth. It can't compute. Because it's just made up of just a bunch of matter in motion, right? This is fallacy of composition. This is very typical informal fallacies from Bahnsen here. We've seen it before.
And as long as Mr. Tabish continues to reason, as long as he continues to assume the uniformity of past experience with what he's saying now, what conclusions he draws scientifically, how he makes his experience intelligible, he's not living in terms of his own assertion about the nature of reality. We have to ask the atheist, why should you be rational? I mean, if man doesn't have a mind, he's just has a brain that's subject to the laws of chemistry and physics, then there is no objective reasoning, and there's no freedom, actually, for us to consider evidence in an argument and choose one way or another. You know, just like weeds grow, so the mind of man does whatever it does by the laws of physics.
Yeah, so here is the basic argument from reason. I went over this in detail in my last video where I critique presuppositionalism. I go over C.S. Lewis's argument from reason about being able to reason just that's determined on physics and so forth. So I recommend you watch that. He talks about again. He says, our reason, the brain's the subject to the laws of chemistry and so forth. So there's a determined universe where previously he was saying everything was random. So again, which is it? Is everything determined by the laws of physics and chemistry, or is everything random? He's flip flops and back forth. He's flip flops back and forth with his arguments here, and no freedom there's actually no freedom. How is reasoning actually free? Does reasoning require randomness? Free of what? No, I would think reasoning is deterministic as a reaction. Okay, if I hear that the Statue of Liberty is in New York City, and I know that New York City is in New York State, I can't help but reason that the Statue of Liberty is in New York State. It's a determined process. There's nothing. What is this freedom stuff? I can't help but think that way. So I'm not sure how freedom plays a part. And I wonder if he's suggesting libertarian free will, since Bahnsen's a Calvinist. He doesn't even believe in libertarian free will. He believes that his will is determined by the will of his God, that everything that comes to pass is foreordained by his God. So I wonder if he's actually appealing to libertarian free will, because I hear some Christians who are not Calvinists claim that, you have to have libertarian free will to reason. Well, I beg to differ. Again, if you want a detailed breakdown of the argument from reason, I recommend looking at my part 4 of my critiquing presuppositionalism series, where I break down basically C.S. Lewis's argument from reason. That's a very popular argument that apologists use. I definitely recommend you watch that if you want to learn more about this argument that they use.
We have to ask the atheist, where is the origin of life? On the evolutionary hypothesis, we are led to the irrational view that life spontaneously generated. And yet science today, all of biological science, proceeds on the opposite assumption, that spontaneous generation is wrong, as a matter of fact.
Well, that's funny, because in Greg Bahnsen's worldview, biological life did come about spontaneously. God gathered some dust together and breathed on it to make the first man. I mean, isn't that a clear example of spontaneous life coming about? Again, this gets into the whole evolution versus creationism debate, abiogenesis, and so forth. There's been tons of debates about this. Greg Bahnsen's very poor. You'll find YouTube videos where he lectures about evolution. He's very poor understanding science and evolution, and it's the same thing here. We do have examples like the Miller-Urey experiment, where they were able to take inorganic materials and create organic materials from it and so forth. But we don't have an answer now. But again, this is just a God of the gaps argument from Bahnsen. But Bahnsen's very ignorant of the evolutionary process. But it's his worldview that affirms that life came about spontaneously. So who is he to complain about that.
You know, no matter how much you tinker or work with the cake mix, you're not going to get the cake mix to make a political constitution. No matter how much you tinker with the cake mix, you're not going to get it to make a dream of a spring day. Why is that? Because the elements of a cake mix have nothing to do with what we're talking about when we talk about political constitutions and dreams and so forth. These are different kinds of things. Similarly, inorganic matter doesn't, by a mechanical reconfiguration, give rise to organic things.
Argument, please. I mean, he asserts that, but how does he know that? Again, we have the Miller-Urey experiment that brought about organic material from inorganic. So Bahnsen's not a scientist. How would he know? He's just asserting that it's an argument from ignorance. Again, how do you get biological life from non-biological life, Bahnsen? Give us the method. Give us the procedure. Can you offer that? Oh, well, God just spoke it. God just does it. Oh, okay. Well, in my worldview, nature just does it. Is that sufficient for you? Because that's the argument you're giving. But inorganic matter doesn't buy a mechanical reconfiguration to give rise to organic things. Well, how do you know that? Have you studied this, Bahnsen? No, he hasn't.
That kind of thinking is mythical. It's going back to the days of alchemy. But that's what the atheist worldview leaves us with. We don't know why we should be rational. We can't understand the origin of life. On the atheist worldview, why should we think in terms of scientific inference? This is what I keep driving at. If you're a materialist, there is no uniformity in nature.
Argument, please. Again, Hume's problem of induction. There's other problems. There's other issues as well. Bertrand Russell, like he brings up, talks about it and so forth. This is an epistemic problem. It's about knowing whether the future will resemble the past. This statement here, Bahnsen claims it's an ontological problem, that if materialism is the case, that the uniformity of nature is impossible. It's metaphysically impossible. It's physically impossible. It just can't happen. If materialism is the case, then there is no uniformity in nature. Well, what's the argument for that? Again, Hume's problem of induction is an epistemic problem, not an ontological or metaphysical problem. So I'd like to know what Bahnsen's argument here, that this is a ontological issue, not an epistemic issue. And again, he's assuming all atheists are materialists as well. Again, that's a straw man attack. We see that a lot. Presuppositionalists and Christian apologists like Frank Turk and so forth will say, "Oh, atheism, that's materialism." Is it? No, there's other worldviews besides materialism. But even if the case that even if you are a materialist, what is the argument that if all there is material matter and energy and the relationships between them, that nature can't be uniform? What rules that out? Bahnsen never says.
There is no answer to Hume's skepticism, in which case the atheist can't assert anything, even that he doesn't like God. Why should we be moral in terms of the atheist universe? On a naturalistic principle, there is no right or wrong. There's just might. There's just what happens. You can't find obligatory authority anywhere in the world if it's just matter in motion.
Well, in Greg Bahnsen's worldview, might makes right. In fact, God's might makes right, and that's the lesson we learn in the book of Job, right? Yahweh humbles Job, saying, "Were you there at the foundations of the earth when I lay it down? Can you do the mighty things that I've done?" No. So it's God's might makes right in his worldview. And notice, obligatory authority. Yeah, Bahnsen's morality is based on some sort of, judge, some sort of authority that overrules people and so forth. My morality is based on the consequences, the actions that lead to flourishing. Okay, you don't need some subjective authority to rule what's right or wrong. All right, we go by the principle of flourishing and well-being. That determines what's right and wrong. But it's the very opposite. There's just might. Yeah, there's just might in his worldview, God's might. So he's projecting here. He's the one who has this problem, not me.
You see, the atheist just cannot answer the tough questions of philosophy. He cannot make intelligible use of his rationality, of scientific inference, of moral obligation. Now, of course, some atheists will say, well, we don't need to answer that. Reality is simply this way. That is to say, he wants to be arbitrary. Well, if you're going to be arbitrary, don't bother to debate. Just say, I'm going to say whatever I want to say. Or sometimes atheists will say, no answer is possible to those deep philosophical questions. No one can know for sure. Of course, that's self-contradictory, isn't it? If no one can know for sure, then how do you know that no one can know for sure?
Well, we can't know that we don't know for sure. We hear that a lot. We'll say, "Oh, skepticism is self-defeating," because are you skeptical? Can you be skeptical of skepticism? Well, yes, you can be skeptical of skepticism as well. Skepticism is not that you doubt everything. It's that you question everything, and you can question skepticism itself. So it's not self-defeating or contradictory. Do I say we can't know for sure? No, I got perhaps one day we can know for sure, but there's a lot of mysteries we don't know, and there's a lot of mysteries within the Christian worldview that at least some Christians are willing to admit that there's mysteries of why God does certain things, or why His nature is a certain way, and try to understand the Trinity, which is a mystery, or the hypostatic union of Jesus, and so forth. Or why does God foreordain sin? Why did God allow the entrance of sin into the world? Those are all mysteries that Calvinist theologians admit are mysteries. Is Greg Bahnsen's worldview perfectly consistent? If I was debating him, I'd bring up all the contradictions within his Calvinistic theology, specifically divine determinism versus human culpability, because that's quite a mystery. That's a problem within his Calvinistic theology.
Basically, what atheists end up saying is that, well, everybody knows nature is uniform. Everybody knows there's moral absolutes. Everybody knows these things. And you know what? On that point, I agree with the atheist. Everybody does know these things. But the problem is they don't comport with atheism.
Again, he says it does not comport with atheism. What's the argument, please? Again, he's making an ontological claim, not an epistemic claim. Right? It's a difference. Again, how is uniformity in nature? How is the principle of induction impossible under atheism? Okay, it's an epistemic issue, not an ontological issue, but he keeps on asserting that it's an ontological issue.
These things that people know very well, the continuing evidence that you need a Christian theistic worldview to make sense out of experience, these things don't comport with atheism. Key philosophical questions are answered by atheists arbitrarily and inconsistently, in a way which can't make sense out of ordinary human experience and reasoning. And atheists try to hide this gaping defect in their theorizing from themselves, but it's not being hid from you tonight. I want you to consider a parallel. A person who were to come tonight and argue no air exists continues to breathe air, doesn't he, while he argues. And when I point out that if, as he says, no air exists, he couldn't be breathing, it would be intellectually inept for him to respond, no, you're wrong to say my theory implies I couldn't be breathing, because in fact I am breathing. You see, he would be so self-deluded that he wouldn't catch the significance of the fact that the facts belie his theory. And the facts, the most common facts of life, inductive reasoning, scientific conclusions, moral judgments, making experience intelligible, belie the theory of atheism. Intellectually speaking, atheists continue to breathe. I know that. They continue to reason, to be scientific, to make moral judgments. I don't doubt that. But the atheistic view of things would, in theory, make such breathing impossible, would render science arbitrary, logic impossible, and ethics nonsense.
Again, he's making he's making an ontological and metaphysical claim here, not an epistemic one. Okay, what exactly am I borrowing here? Again, well-being and happiness has intrinsic value, and we don't need some religious book to tell us that. Breathing impossible and so forth. Render science arbitrary. Again, science has works on metaphysical assumptions such as the uniformity of nature and so forth. But again, how does atheism rule this stuff out? Bahnsen never offers an argument. He just asserts it. They just repeat the same things over and over again without backing it up.
Atheists work hard to hide this intellectual poverty from themselves. That's why they look up verses in the Bible and try to ridicule things, rather than getting down to the basic issue of, do you have a philosophy of life in terms of which you can reason about anything at all? And they pretend, philosophically speaking, that they're not breathing God's air all the time. They're arguing against him.
Yeah. Bahnsen has his presuppositions. I have my presuppositions. That's what I reason from. Do I have a philosophy of life in terms of which I can reason at anything at all? Yes, I do. I wish he would learn about them rather than just straw manning atheism. And again, it's amazing the arrogance presuppositionalists have that they've actually solved all of the philosophical problems that philosophers have been struggling with centuries. They have solved Hume's problem of induction. They've solved the problem of the one in many, the problem of the criterion, and so forth. All of it's solved just by stipulation. God did it. God can do anything. God guarantees whatever solution we need. We can just come up with it. It's amazing. But again, he keeps on talking about atheists are inconsistent, they're contradictory, and so forth. Maybe his straw man view is, but I challenge you to challenge me. I don't think I'm being inconsistent. Do I have all the answers in life? No, but neither do they. So again, I don't see anything inconsistent or I have to borrow from their worldview.
The Apostle Paul in Acts 17 said to the philosophers in ancient Greece, "In him, in God, we live and move and have our existence." You see, God is the very atmosphere of our lives.
Thank you, Dr.
He's the
Bahnsen.
intellectual precondition of all of our rationality and all of our morality.
Thank you, Dr. Bahnsen.
All right. Well, that's it. It was a 10-minute opening statement he gave. Again, if you want to watch the whole debate, I have a link in the description. You can watch the full 2 hours and 35 minutes. I think Mr. Tevish, I think he did make some philosophical blunders. He's a lawyer, not a philosopher. So Bahnsen calls him out on certain things, and rightly so. I didn't think he did that bad. But I really wasn't interested in what he had to say. I was more interested in what Bahnsen had to say, because that's why I wanted to critique. So that was it. So I got done under an hour, which is great. Sometimes some of these presentations I give kind of go on because I have a lot of material to go over. But again, this was just a 10-minute video, so I critiqued a 10-minute video within an hour. So that's it. I'll check the live chat, see if you have any questions or any comments or anything. If not, I'll just end it. So, all right. I have not only 9 people watching. Yeah, unfortunately, I have a very small YouTube channel. I don't even have a 1,000 subscribers yet. Um, but I don't make a lot of videos anyway. So, well, that's it. It's an hour, so and I don't see any questions, so I will end it here. So thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll have some more videos later time as well. So, all right, good night.